Chapter 17. Here Comes the Queen. When Isaiah got home, he thought he might die. He had bled like a stuck pig, but he refused to allow himself to think about that. He could not die. There was work to be done. His father heard him in the front room. He came out of the bedroom to find his oldest son looking like he had been dipped in a clawfoot soaker tub filled with blood. When Mama came in, she screamed out the anguish Pop felt and was working overtime to contain. Isaiah's mouth was still not operating properly. All he could muster was, "Pearl. They killed my Pearl." His father gently took Charles Maccabee's straight razor out of his son's hand and placed it on the table. He helped Isaiah down into a creaky wooden chair. "Mama, get Jean. Keep Sissy in the bedroom, you hear? 9-year-old don't need to see this mess." Isaiah's mama nodded. Her older sister Jean had a steadier hand for delicate stitching, and if a boy's face was to be saved, Jean was the one to do it. Pap had a jam jar with grain alcohol tucked deep in the back of the top kitchen cabinet. He left Isaiah at the table and got it down. Jean came out in her nightdress with her sewing kit in hand. Pap turned up the wick on the lantern and slid it closer to her workplace. Without batting an eye at the gore, she pulled up a chair by Isaiah and assessed the carnage. She did not blanch. Even without Dr. Halstead's education, she had learned to triage and compartmentalize all of her life experiences. She would have gone mad a long time since had she not. She heated her sewing needle to red hot, then cooled it with a hiss in a glass of the grain alcohol that Pop had poured. "You're going to have to hold him while I clean it," she said. Pap nodded. She laid a gentle hand on Isaiah's shoulder. "Isaiah, you're going to lay back on the table and we're going to get that wound clean as the day you was born. Going to hurt you worse than the cutting did. You understand?" asked Jean. Isaiah nodded mutely. Pop helped him onto the table and laid him back. When Jean poured the grain into the wound, a scream tried to explode out of him, but he held on to it. He put his mind out of reach of the experience and let the fire of the pain sear into him. It felt like she was pouring hot acid onto his face that seeped through the wound into his skull, soaking his brain, filling his spinal cord to the brim and overflowing from there to the tips of his fingers and toes, turning everything inside him to the same burning mush that was Charles Maccabee's corpse in the rooming house. Isaiah passed out. When he came back around, Jean was tying off the last stitch on his jaw. She cleaned it all again, and this time it burned, but not the way the first cleansing had. Together, Pap and Jean helped him off the table to a chair. She wrapped his face with clean cotton cloth strips, leaving his eyes and mouth unobscured. She kissed him gently on the forehead with all the love she had, and left him sitting alone with his Pap. Pop poured 2 small glasses of the grain. He passed one to Isaiah and had a sip of his own. Isaiah had a small taste. It hurt his upper lip and burned his palate. He set it aside. He had to concentrate to make the words. "I got to go, Pap. Can you tell me what happened?" "Don't know for sure. McMaster, Mr. Cox, some one of them killed Pearl at the rooming house." "One of them did this to you?" asked Pop. Isaiah swallowed hard. "Manager of her company. I killed him, Pop." Tears started to flow out of Isaiah, dropping onto the raw grey wood of the table and soaking into it. His father chewed on that. You killed him, why? Supposed to protect her. You failed that. Had to pay him for it. Now I got to go. It ain't gonna come back on y'all, I promise. Patton nodded his head slowly. He finished his drink. It's gonna do what it's gonna do, son. It's gonna do what it's gonna do. But we'll weather it, for sure. After Isaiah changed his clothes and shoved a few choice possessions in an old rucksack, he found his family gathered in the living room. There were tears and anger, a lifetime's worth of hard scrabble sadness and regret. Isaiah hugged them all, then pulled himself away. It was 3:12 in the morning. There was much work to be done and many miles to travel before that sun came up. From the road, he stopped once to look back at the light in the only home he had ever known. Then he moved on, into the darkness, his destination clear. Isaiah reached the Cox family home just after 4 a.m. There was no one stirring. In one hand he held his corn switchblade, in the other Charles Maccabee's pearl-inlaid straight razor. Both hands were weak and shaking. His entire face was throbbing and aching. He was lightheaded from the blood loss and lack of sleep. Isaiah cursed himself for a coward. He'd passed Donnie McMaster's house on the way. It was dark as pitch. He knew that Donnie was, most certain, in the jailhouse, sleeping off his drunk. He mulled over the prospect of going into Donnie's house and revenging himself by killing Donnie's missus. Little did he know that Donnie would have secretly exulted in and celebrated Missy's homicide had he steeled himself and gone through with it. But that was neither here nor there. A black girl, Carrie Ann, worked for the McMasters, tending house. She was a live-in maid. Isaiah wanted vengeance, but he did not particularly relish the idea of killing Missy, and of course did not aim to kill Carrie Ann too, to keep her from telling who had done it. He walked away unsatisfied, and now, with dawn near 2 hours away, he sat outside the Cox house and debated what came next. Isaiah could not reconcile leaving Cox County without slitting Harlan Cox's pretty white neck. On the upside, the act would feel like justice for certain. On the downside, he could not figure any way to do it without it boomeranging back on his family. If they saw him, they would find out who he was. If they found out who he was and he got away, his family, maybe Silas in particular, would pay the immediate price for it. If these dumb crackers could not catch the right young black man who committed the murder, white justice would almost certainly hang the nearest best black man. Isaiah knew that would be his brother, his father, or both. If that happened, Mama and little Sis and Jean would be as good as killed themselves. For an hour and a quarter, Isaiah played out all the possible outcomes. The ones that initially satisfied all resulted in Harlan Cox begging for his life and then losing it. Not a single one taught him how to accomplish that end without killing his own family alongside Harlan. At 5:30, he saw movement on the road. He knew he had run out of time to act as he watched Aunt Jean make her way along the dark road past his hiding place, then up the back stoop and quietly into the Cox kitchen. The door closed behind her, and Isaiah was alone in the night. He thumbed the straight razor shut, then slipped it into his back pocket. He pressed the corn switch and folded the blade into the handle. In the distance, a train whistled her Morse code signal into the ether. Da-da-di-da. Here comes the Queen. Isaiah picked up his ruck and faded into the trees, heading for the northbound line, the rolling train, and all that was to come after he hopped on board her.